Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and call to order the Planning Commission for July 11th, 2022. If you want to go ahead and make the announcements for this evening.
Yes. The county fosters public engagement during the meeting and encourages public participation, civility, and use of courteous language. The county does not condone the use of profanity, vulgar language, gestures, or other inappropriate behavior, including personal attacks or threats directed towards any meeting participant. In compliance with the directives of the county, state, and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the meeting is open to public attendance pursuant to health and safety guidelines. The practice of social distancing and wearing of face coverings, masks, or shield is recommended for the health and safety of all persons participating in person during the meeting, although it is not required. Seating is limited and available on a first-come, first-served basis. To make a public comment, please complete a speaker request form and hand it to the clerk. The chairperson will call your name when it's your turn to make a comment. You may also send a written comment to boardclerk@saccounty.net, and your comment will be routed to the board and filed in the record.
And will you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. And so, members Borja,
Here.
Raythel,
Here.
Corona Sabagnano, here. Tatishi,
Here.
and Wong.
Here.
And we do have a quorum.
Thank you. If you all please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And we do have just a few agenda announcements this evening. First off, item number 3 has been dropped from the agenda and will be held at the July 25th Planning Commission meeting. So if you are here for item number 3, just wanted to give you that update that it will not be heard tonight. We're also going to change the agenda items around. We are going to hear item number 2 first this evening, and then we're going to move on to item number 1. So if we go ahead and call item number 2, we can get started.
Item number 2 is for a use permit amendment located on the east side of Scott Road, about 1 mile south of White Rock Road in the Cosumnes community. And the environmental doc is Final Environmental Impact Report Memorandum dated November 4th, 2021.
Good evening. I'm Mark McLean with Planning and Environmental Review. And wait for the presentation. All right, good evening. I'm Mark McLean with Planning and Environmental Review, and I'm going to present the Tykerd Use Permit Amendment. Next slide, please. The site is located on the east side of Scott Road, about 1 mile south of White Rock Road in the Cosumnes community. It's indicated there in the red. Next slide, please. Okay, the applicant is requesting a 7-year extension to January 28th, 2029 for completion of all procedure actions required under Use Permit 2002-0636, including issuance of the work authorization permit. No other aspects of the project will be modified. Just a little history on the work authorization permit. So the applicant originally had until December 30th, 2015 to obtain the WAP. Due to litigation, the date for obtaining the work authorization permit was moved to January 28th, 2017. And then finally, a 5-year extension to obtain the work authorization permit was approved on January 2016 with a new expiration date of January 28th, 2022. Next slide, please. Okay, there are no changes to the approved project other than the time extension. The final hearing body is the Board of Supervisors, and the environmental coordinator has determined the environmental impact report as prepared for the original use permit is still adequate and appropriate for the current project. Next slide. Staff recognize the environmental coordinator's memorandum dated October 13th, 2021, and determined the final environmental report for the Tykerd quarry. Apologize for the wrong line up there. Still adequate and appropriate for the project use, and approve the amended use permit for Tykerd quarry subject to the findings and conditions in attachment 2. Next slide, if you have any questions.
Commissioners, any questions for staff this evening? All right, thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
And at this time, we'll invite the applicant up to address the commission. And the clerk will get you sworn in.
Okay. If you wish to address the commission, please stand, which you already are, prepare to be sworn. Please raise your right hand and the appropriate response as I do. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give this commission is the truth? So help you God. If you do not swear, do you so affirm?
I do.
Okay. If you'd please state your name for the record and make the statement, I have been sworn.
My name is Justin Stein, and I have been sworn.
Thank you, Justin.
Good evening. My name is Justin Stein. I'm from Tykert. I'm project manager there. I want to first thank Mark Michelini and all the staff for getting the project to where it is today. We reviewed the staff report, and we have no further comments. I'll be here if you have any questions.
Perfect. Any questions this evening? Perfect. All right, Justin, thank you. No questions at this time from the commission. Appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we'll move on to public comments.
And there are no telephonic public comments, but we do have one gentleman in chambers, sir. Would you have the slip?
This is for Metro Air Park, though?
Oh, I apologize. That's for item number 1. So no, there are no further public comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
If anyone is here for item number 2, go ahead and come on up. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public comment. And we'll move on to commissioner deliberation.
I move the item and follow the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion before I call for a vote? All right, if you go ahead and call the roll, clerk.
Yes, members Borja,
Aye.
Rethel,
Yes.
Corona Sabagnano,
Yes.
Tatishi,
Yes.
and Wong.
Aye.
And the motion passes for staff recommendation.
All right, that concludes item number 2. If you'll go ahead and please call item number 1.
And item number 1 is for a zoning ordinance amendment and approval of addendum to 1992 Metro Air Park Transportation Systems Management Plan, located east of Power Line Road, west of Lone Tree Road, south of West Alberta Road, and north of Interstate 5 in the Natomas community. And the environmental document is for final environmental impact report addendum.
Okay, good evening, Commissioners. Chris Pahuli, Principal Planner. I will be providing the staff presentation for this item. I should also note that the applicant team, led by Mr. Tom Ramos and Mr. Nick Avdis, are here and will be providing a presentation following staff's presentation and questions from the planning commissioners. As this entitlement request is for a special planning area ordinance amendment, which is a legislative action, the Board of Supervisors will be the final hearing authority, with the Planning Commission acting as the advisory body. Before I launch into my presentation, I do want to take a few moments to frame the discussion this evening. Over the past 6 years or so, development at Metro Air Park has been occurring at a frantic pace, fueled by the demand for large format logistics centers and warehouse distribution facilities, and the unique locational advantages of being proximate to both the Sacramento International Airport and Interstate 5. Currently, the Metro Air Park SPA has development caps on the amount of acreage devoted to these types of uses in the plan area's commercial districts. At its core, this SPA ordinance amendment would increase the development cap to allow for additional logistics centers and warehouse distribution facilities to be developed to meet market demand. If not approved, county staff anticipate that this cap will be exhausted in a few months. There are a number of other minor amendments to the SPA ordinance and a complementary transportation systems management plan that I will discuss during the course of the presentation. However, I also wanted to note that as part of this package, staff is also bringing forward a discussion about development requirements for the area proximate to a future light rail station. As part of this evening's presentation, staff will be asking the Commission to opine on this matter, and those comments will be included in the report package to the board. Finally, I did want to note the urgency of this matter. As I mentioned, the current development caps are expected to be exhausted in a few months, so staff is working to turn this report package around to the board in a little over a month. Tentatively, we plan to have this item heard by the board on August 23rd, so that if approved, planned and contemplated projects could continue to move forward uninterrupted. With that background on this entitlement package, I will move forward with the staff presentation. Next slide, please. To help orient those that might not be familiar with the location of Metro Air Park, the roughly 1,800-acre plan area is located immediately east of Sacramento International Airport and west of the city of Sacramento, roughly 10 miles from downtown Sacramento. As I mentioned during my preamble, this entitlement package follows a significant amount of progress being made to develop the plan area, including a number of completed and in-progress logistics and warehouse distribution facilities, the completion of the Metro Air Park Interstate 5 interchange, and progress on a new single-family neighborhood in the city of Sacramento. Next slide, please. All of the land inside the red border on this aerial map is subject to the Metro Air Park SPA ordinance. These properties each have an SPA zoning designation. The SPA does contain 6 districts, each with their own development intent and prohibited, permitted, and conditionally permitted uses. The properties located adjacent to the SPA include the airport and agricultural land to the north and northeast. Although not clearly shown on this aerial, to the east in the city of Sacramento, the North Lake development is under construction, and at build-out will bring a significant number of homes to the border of the plan area. Next slide. There have been plans to develop Metro Air Park for nearly 60 years, but the SPA, which regulates development in the plan area, was adopted by the board in 1993. It has been revised numerous times since, with major updates occurring in 1998 and in 2018. The 2018 amendment, the intent was to streamline and clarify development regulations by establishing base zoning for those subdistricts or districts that I mentioned. It was also to relax development standards, to specify review processes to meet market demand. The update also included many changes to the landscape and design guidelines, including a master signage program in an effort to brand Metro Air Park as a unique industrial business park in the region. The first project in the plan area was the 855,000 square foot Amazon warehouse and distribution center, which was completed in 2017 and served as a catalyst for further development. Since completion of that project, 6 additional warehouse and distribution facilities totaling over 3.6 million square feet have been constructed. 2.3 million square feet are currently under construction with completion expected this year. Taken together, these developments bring the total build-out to Metro Air Park at over 30%. The graphic on this slide shows completed projects in blue. There are under construction and entitlement projects at Metro Air Park that are shown in the orange, green, and red on the map. County staff estimate that based on current demand projections and work being done currently, that build-out of Metro Air Park could be at over 50% by the end of next year. Next slide. So it's within this market context that last year the Metro Air Park Owners Association, or MAPOA, filed an application with the county to amend the SPA. At the time the application was filed, it was only to amend the industrial and manufacturing cap from 69 acres to 300 acres. However, MAPOA subsequently asked to increase the hotel acreage from 30 to 40 acres. Additionally, MAPOA agreed to include a set of fix-it amendments to the SPA ordinance and landscape and design guidelines, which were being recommended by planning staff. I should note that as part of these fix-its, planning staff proposed amendments to restrict non-transit compatible uses proximate to the future light rail station. However, that language has been removed, and as I noted earlier, we instead are seeking direction from the board regarding potential amendments to the SPA to clarify the county's intent for development proximate to that future light rail station. And there'll be more on that later during the presentation. So finally, an addendum to the Metro Air Park TSMP has been bundled together with this package for the board's consideration and approval, as it really helps to facilitate the request to increase the development caps. Next slide. I want to dive a little deeper on some of the major components of the SPA ordinance amendment. As noted earlier, the primary driver of this package is the request to increase the maximum acreage devoted to industrial manufacturing uses in districts 4, 5B, and 5C from 69 to 300 acres, and hotel uses in districts 3A, 4, and 5A through C from 30 to 40 acres. In addition, there are a number of other minor changes to the SPA and landscape and design guidelines, primarily requested by county staff to clarify requirements, which include a project which would exceed the maximum floor area ratio is permissible, subject to a special development permit issued by the Planning Commission, formatting and ordering changes to the development standards section, annual reporting requirements in the performance standards section, an updated circulation plan which details existing and potential secondary roads and the planned light rail line. And then lastly, updated signage standards for service station, fuel price monument signs, and building signage standards have been relaxed in an effort to allow for signs that are more compatible to the size of the building. Next slide. So the amendment package does include some minor changes to the master signage program, which was, as I mentioned, adopted in 2018 with the expectation that it would provide standards for consistent monument signage and theming throughout the plan area. The master signage program includes monochromatic text for all signs, and that was intentional. It was done in an effort to establish a sense of place and to not allow the corporate signs and colors to dilute the Metro Air Park brand. During the processing of the SPA amendment package, MAPOA asked planning to consider changes to the master signage program that would allow for corporate colors and logos on the freeway and monument signs. Their stated rationale for requesting the change was that businesses, primarily retail businesses, want their corporate colors and logos on signage because it provides greater brand visibility and recognition. Planning staff presented MAPOA's proposal to the Design Review Advisory Committee, and while the DRAC members were supportive of the overall package of amendments, they were not in support of the changes to the master signage program. Concerns raised by the DRAC included that it would lead to an increase in visual clutter, that there was limited need for advertising signage for most of the Metro Air Park tenants, and that it was undermining the work done to develop a comprehensive and consistent signage program. The DRAC recommended that if the board did decide to permit signage to include corporate logos and colors, that it be limited to the on-site monument signs only and not the freeway signage. I should mention that this request for changes to the master signage program occurred following the CPAC's review of the of the requested entitlements. And so given the timing concerns of this package, we moved it forward without returning to the CPAC for a recommendation on that particular matter. But we do have the comments, as I noted, from the DRAC. As noted in the report package, planning staff is not supportive of MAPOA's proposed changes to the master signage program. However, the changes are included with this report package as an alternative for the Planning Commission and Board to consider. Next slide. So this slide shows a side-by-side graphic of the freeway sign. This was presented to the DRAC. The one on the left is the graphic from the board adopted 2018 master signage program, which shows that there can be, although it's monochromatic, that there can be differentiation in the font and text. On the right is the graphic that shows the freeway sign with multiple logos and corporate colors. So wanted to provide this to you. Again, it's in the report package, but wanted to include this in the presentation as well. Next slide. Next, I wanted to note that MAPOA did prepare an addendum to the 1992 Transportation Systems Management Plan to address changes in development patterns at Metro Air Park and to support the modifications requested with this SPA ordinance amendment, including the industrial manufacturing cap increase. The TSMP would normally be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission, but in this case, it has been bundled together with the entitlement package for concurrent processing by the board. And so therefore, there'll be a review and recommendation from the Planning Commission, but the final approval of the TSMP will be handled by the board. The measures included in the TSMP amendment or TSMP addendum are they've included transit waiting shelters, bicycle racks, bicycle repair stations, wayfinding signs, and infrastructure required for electric bike share. There are plans for zero-emission internal shuttle and incentives to commute via transit. And these measures do work together with the air quality management plan to reduce the emissions associated with employee trips so that hopefully there is the achievement of the minimum 1.5 persons per vehicle peak hour that is a requirement or a performance standard rather in the SPA ordinance. Planning staff, including the environmental coordinator, have determined that the TSMP addendum is consistent with the Metro Air Park SPA ordinance and the zoning code requirements, and further that the TSMP addendum provides additional measures and programs that would adequately address the current and future build-out of Metro Air Park, especially when compared with the original TSMP that was submitted back in 1992 and approved in 1993. Next slide. So I do want to acknowledge that there's that the presentation does include sort of multiple items, and especially this piece here doesn't fit as nicely. But this is the component part where we're going to talk a little bit about the transit supportive use discussion. I do want to start with a little bit of context for why we've included this as part of the amendment package. So with the opening of the interchange that I mentioned earlier, there has been an increase in the interest in the retail portion of the plan area, with applications filed for gas stations, retail development, hotels, and industrial projects. The area nearest to the future light rail station is located in a commercial district. And that commercial district does permit a variety of uses, but importantly does not distinguish between permitted and prohibited uses or unique development standards for properties located proximate to the future light rail station. As most of these uses, including ones that could be considered non-transit supportive, are allowed by right with only a non-discretionary design review, planning staff wanted to seek board direction to determine if a future amendment sponsored by the county was necessary to ensure desired uses proximate to the future station. To that end, planning staff has prepared 3 options for the board to consider and provide guidance. I'll go into these options in greater detail on the upcoming slides, but they are 1, a no change option, 2, an option to amend the land use table to encourage transit supportive uses, and 3, an option to develop specific floor area ratio requirements for the area nearest to the light rail station. Next slide. So the graphic on this slide shows the future light rail station in red crosshatch. It is on the southwest corner of Metro Air Parkway and Meister Way. It further shows the 1/8, 1/4, and 1/2 mile radii from that future light rail station. You can also see the parcelization. This is the current parcelization. However, there have been a number of tentative parcel maps that have been recently processed and approved that would further divide these larger parcels into smaller parcels for development. Next slide. The graphic on this slide does show one such parcelization. This is the northeast corner of Meister and Metro Air Parkway, and you can see that the tentative map does divide that larger parcel up into parcels of land that can be developed as perhaps gas stations and quick serve restaurants and so forth. The first option would be to make no further modifications to the SPA. Certain non-transit compatible uses would continue to be permitted by right, including drive-through restaurants, car washes, commercial parking garages, and self-storage facilities. These developments would be subject to a staff-level design review to ensure compliance with Metro Air Park development standards and design guidelines. It should be noted that automotive service stations would continue to be subject to a conditional use permit from the board. However, with no changes to the SPA, staff would be evaluating the request based on the project's consistency with the SPA and the Sacramento County Zoning Code to make all appropriate findings. Next slide. The second option would be to amend the land use table in the SPA ordinance. The amended land use table would address non-transit compatible uses by including them as either prohibited or conditionally permitted uses. A footnote would be added to the land use table to indicate that these requirements apply to parcels of land that fall within the designated radius of the optional station or future station. Additionally, for conditionally permitted uses, findings would need to be established to address transit supportive projects. For conditionally permitted, I'm sorry, I mentioned that. As there is great uncertainty regarding the timing of construction of the light rail station or of the Green Line and the optional station, staff would recommend that this option be limited to properties within the 1/8 of a mile of that future station. And then also, given that the amount of development interest in this immediate area, staff would further recommend that the board, if they did decide to pursue this option, that they consider either an urgency ordinance or some other type of mechanism to ensure that the development proposals would be consistent with the board's intentions in this area in the near term. Next slide. So the third option would be to modify the floor area ratio requirements. As noted in the report package last year, the planning director issued a determination that the general plan's floor area ratios contained in Land Use Policy 32 for transit-oriented development areas would not apply in Metro Air Park, and that they only would need to comply with the FARs in the SPA. Those floor area ratio requirements are significantly lower than those contained in the general plan. So under the SPA amendment package proposed, deviations to the FAR would be considered as part of that, as part of an issuance. I'm sorry, let me go back for a second. The MAP SPA FARs are significantly lowered, as I mentioned, and we have heard from a number of potential applicants that they have wanted to develop at a higher than the FAR request, higher than the FAR requirement in the SPA. And so, as I mentioned earlier, as part of this package, we are proposing that deviations to the FAR requirement could be considered by the Planning Commission with an SPA, with a special development permit. This option 3, does propose a minimum FAR within a certain distance of the optional station. And I would note that if the board did move forward with this option, similar to option 2, that staff would be recommending that it be limited to properties within 1/8 of a mile of the station as well. Next slide. So to comply with CEQA, staff has prepared an addendum to the final EIR for the Metro Air Park SPA ordinance. Due to the SPA amendment's potential change in the mix of land uses, an initial study was conducted to assess any changes in operational impacts from the analysis in the final EIR. Based on the initial study, staff concluded the SPA amendment would not create a new or substantially greater significant impact, and therefore the addendum to the final EIR was prepared. The addendum concludes that the SPA amendment would not change any of the impacts related to air quality emissions, aesthetics, agricultural resources, biological resources, cultural resources, geology and mineral resources, hydrology, land use, noise, a number of other potential impacts. In addition, all mitigation measures included as part of the final EIR would continue to be implemented. As all of the impacts would be within the scope of the impacts identified in the certified final EIR, no additional environmental analysis is necessary. Next slide. As it relates to advisory meetings, I mentioned that the Natomas CPAC met and are recommending approval of the requested entitlements. I did note that they did not, however, review the changes in the master signage program, and so that was not part of their consideration. Then I've also mentioned that the DRAC did review the package and are supportive of the overall amendments with the exception of the proposed changes to the master signage program. Next slide. So staff is supportive of the entitlement package before the Planning Commission this evening. As I noted earlier, Metro Air Park is a major economic driver for Sacramento County. Staff has concluded that current market demands support the increase in the cap acres for industrial manufacturing and hotel uses. The minor amendments to the SPA and landscape and design guidelines, which are included in the package, will assist the county and applicants to navigate and facilitate additional development. Staff has concluded that the Metro Air Park TSMP addendum meets the requirements of the SPA ordinance and the Sacramento County Zoning Code. And lastly, there are no significant environmental concerns, and the requested SPA amendment is supported by the Natomas CPAC and DRAC. Next slide. So this slide contains the recommendations, which are recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. They are to recognize the addendum to the Metro Air Park final EIR, to approve the ordinance amending the SPA, landscape and design guidelines, approve the TSMP, and then lastly, as I noted, we are seeking input from the Planning Commission as it relates to the proposed changes to the SPA for the areas proximate to the future light rail station. And again, that information will be bundled and part of the board package for their consideration. So that concludes my rather lengthy presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Chris. Questions for staff this evening? All right, Peter, you're up first.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very thorough, and I appreciate kind of walking through everything. Regarding the light rail station or proposed light rail station, you made a comment that I just want some clarity around. You said proposed. Do we not know if that's going to be, if SAC-RT is committed to that for the future, or is it just an idea? Do we not know a timeline?
We don't know a couple of things. So it is included as an optional light rail station on the Green Line. So there is some question as to whether or not it would be a station that would be built out, or it could be a later phase of the Green Line. In conversations with RT, they do seem to be committed to the development of the station at some point in the future. However, as I think the commissioners know, it is a number of years out before the Green Line, especially out to the airport, is anticipated to be completed. So there is certainly both a concern about whether or not the station would be developed, as well as the timing for the line being developed as well.
So if I understand correctly, there's an urgency, though, because there's a need to develop now in all of that space, and we're having to consider an option based on something that we don't have any timelines for from RT, or even commitments from, do we know if we're getting any IIJA money from the federal government to support this Green Line or anything of that sort, or is it truly years, but we have a need in months?
That's my understanding, is that it again will be some time out. I'm not sure. We've had conversations with them about the status of the environmental document that's being prepared for the Green Line, but in terms of any funding, I think that there is a hope on RT's part that if the ballot measure in November is passed, that will provide some funding to move forward with some portions of the Green Line. But again, getting it all the way out to the airport is going to require considerable resources and is going to be a long time out.
Okay, so appreciate that. And then I'll ask one more question, then I'll yield. In regards to kind of looking at the traffic dynamics with the growth of the new developments from the City of Sacramento, did the City of Sacramento comment at all on this proposal and any impacts that it would have on the neighborhood adjacent?
They did not provide any comments during the processing of this application.
So at this point, we don't know if they have any concerns with potentially increased traffic or anything that would be going through those new residential areas adjacent?
Not that I'm aware of
Okay.
that they have any concerns. I do think that there are some restrictions on the truck traffic through the North Lake neighborhood, and perhaps the applicant team, who's I believe involved in that project in some way, may be able to speak to that as well.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Wong?
Hi, thank you. First, I'd like to compliment you, Chris, on a great presentation and a great staff report. You know, I think you took a fairly large project with a lot of pieces and were able to put it together and organize it so that way at least, you know, I could understand what was going on. I just wanted to ask for one clarification, though. In the addendum for the final EIR, it basically concluded that there was not a significant impact, even though we were going from 69 acres of industrial manufacturing use to 300. And, you know, at first blush, I thought, well, wait a minute, how is there no significant impact? You know, it's a significant increase. But as I read further, is it because the increased usage would also be subject to the same mitigation measures that were imposed in the original EIR, and so that's why there's no significant impact, because they're subject to the same mitigation measures as before?
Probably let Joelle Inman, our environmental coordinator, handle that question.
So I think that it's a mix. It's somewhat what you said, as well as the fact that the uses in the area are different, and so their trip generations are different, and the overall impact stays actually less than what we originally showed. Additionally, we're looking at build out of it right now, and so things haven't built out to their maximum potential as well, and so we're able to take into consideration some of that as well.
Okay, so basically, at the beginning, we predicted things to be one way, but then now we find ourselves in 2022 and things have actually developed in a different way. And so it kind of ended up balancing each other out.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Borja.
Thank you again for the staff for preparing this rather complicated presentation. Kind of piggybacking on that question regarding environmental mitigation. When this was passed, we were still on a pre-VMT reduction type of world. Your environmental document still has level of service. And so not even counting the fact that we as planners also have to contain consistency with the larger SACOG, which is our Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is also mandated by the state to meet certain GHG and greenhouse gas requirements. I'm having a little bit of a concern, and perhaps you can point me, it's quite a large document, but consistency with a SACOG MTP SCS would be a number one thing. Trip generation, you're looking at level of service, but now the state is requiring for the county to get significant amount of dollars for vehicle miles travels reduction as well as greenhouse gas reduction. And so, the power brokers that talked about the actual tax measure that Commissioner Tateishi, that you had questioned about RT, that's a significant construction in the green line. However, there is a large caveat that the governor and the administration puts on any tax measure that they need to have some sort of reduction to all of these, not just the executive orders, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that we don't exist in a vacuum. There are certain requirements that we need to follow through and the county to be able to follow through. And so what I'm trying to ascertain is where in the staff report can we find that there is consistency and compliance with that MTP SCS reduction. And I believe the numbers are still at 19%. And so as a county, how are we, and our Board of Supervisors sit on the MPOs, so they have their own staff, and they're also going to be noting this. But I guess for us as a kind of judging body, how are we able to, provide some sort of recommendation if we're unsure yet whether or not that's kind of like meeting the overall holistic goal? And also the second part, what kinds of, challenges would we have? Is this putting some sort of constraints on any of the Department of Housing and Community Development requirements on transit-oriented ordinance? And is it also meeting some of the questions that Caltrans have also added on that exit for a severely constrained corridor? And so just a number of questions. I apologize. That kind of went on too long, but I guess I give you, Mr. Pahuli, an opportunity to share.
Well, I think we probably can address maybe the first question, which is related to the VMT analysis and maybe the technical studies that we did require that the applicant prepare so that we could prepare the addendum. So maybe Joelle can speak to that.
Yeah. I think, we'll take that in chunks, I think. As far as the process that we went to end up with this addendum document you guys have before you and are considering tonight, we did do that initial study that Chris referenced in his presentation. And as a part of that, we looked at VMT and any other area or topical area that might have had increased impacts. And one of the things that we looked at was air quality. We looked at transportation, and we looked at what we could do as far as could we address VMT. Well, we looked at things and we realized that there was a shown reduction that actually Commissioner Wong was just referencing in both air quality and other related impacts, transportation as well, that there was a reduction in trip generation, there was a reduction in air quality. So that was the first thing that we noted. And then we looked into CEQA case law and what we're allowed to do with subsequent documents. And CEQA is pretty clear, and case law is as well, that we cannot do a subsequent document for things that are not considered substantial new evidence or new information, and this VMT is not that. And so we also, with that in mind, for informational purposes, asked for them to do a VMT analysis, or at least a cut and dry one, and we prepared some information in our addendum that indicates that there was a reduction in VMT as well. And so, for all those reasons, we were able to say that there was not a new significant impact or a substantial increase in any of the impacts that we addressed. And I know that's only the beginning of your question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ms. Inman. I really appreciate it. I guess as population grows and as more usage of what was already kind of identified as the current or the planned use for that site, do you in your staff report then show consistency that it's not going to go across any of the other state changes or state mandates that's happened ever since the first SPA was passed? I guess what I'm having a tough time is we make the SPA changes as requested, and then we realize that either density is not being met or somebody's going to challenge it because of RENA. I think those are some of the concerns that I have in here, where it would really actually be great to have even both Sacramento Regional Transit and the MPO to be part of this conversation, because we don't all exist in a vacuum. And so, having come from that world, and I think we have an opportunity to kind of educate the public also as to what that's going to happen, so that we're not kind of just making a decision in a vacuum. That's kind of my part. And then the second thing was, as we're also proposing more uses in that site, does the current Caltrans design for that exit also, I guess, meet the trip generation and the level of service? I know now they're also looking at vehicle miles traveled, but is that also something that we can, hopefully figure out in the staff report?
Sorry, my mic is not working. Oh, there it is. Okay. So maybe the first question, I believe that the project was analyzed for a full build out, and that then the impacts associated with VMT for that project were considered in the MTP SES, but that's a baseline sort of situation, and that's what we then evaluated this project against. So again, we're showing a reduction in both trip generation and VMT associated with this proposed project from the existing baseline project. So I think that kind of answers both. As far as the Caltrans, at the interchange, it was considered and would be a less of an impact with full build out under this scenario.
And then maybe just to add on to that, since you mentioned RENA and density, and I know other commissioners had questions as well about housing, just to make sure that everyone is aware, there is no housing that is allowed as part of the SPA. It's not a allowed use in the SPA, so there is no housing that would be developed there at any point in the future.
You have hotels here, right?
Hotels, correct. Yes.
And one last question. I'm sorry, Chair, but as far as your TMSP is concerned, do we have is Natomas Jibe one of the potential transportation mitigation, and what is kind of their have they been considered and consulted, or are they supportive of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the applicant team, when they present, I think they can speak more to their conversations with potential providers and so forth. I would also note that with the TSMP, there is an annual report that will be prepared as well so that we can track progress and whether or not they're meeting the performance standard metrics.
Thank you.
Any others, Commissioner Borja?
That's it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I'm going to ask a follow-up real quick just before I go to you, Commissioner Severiano. It just seems a little counterintuitive to me that, and I'm just going to ask you pretty directly, it seems counterintuitive that we're going to build logistics centers to replace commercial, and this is going to reduce our vehicle miles traveled. I trust the experts. I've looked at a lot of traffic analyses, but to me, going to Walmart and picking up everything I need, or going to the store and picking up everything I need, would seem to be more cost-effective or more effective from a vehicle miles traveled standpoint or an emission standpoint than clicking my Amazon app to have things delivered one by one. So could you kind of go into how that works out, just so I can understand?
Yeah, and I just wanted to start off by saying that there's no bigger critic. They're probably going to laugh right now. I think I had those same concerns, absolutely, and my staff did as well. So we definitely looked into this quite a bit because I think that is what most people would consider. But the way that it works out is that with VMT, we're looking at employees and people taking their trips to commercial retail. And so there's more impact. With an industrial building, we're solely looking at just the employee vehicle miles traveled. And so there isn't as many employees. The truck traffic that is going in and out of there is considered part of the existing baseline because those trucks are happening in the area and going to those people no matter what. So those are excluded from our VMT analysis for industrial buildings. And so while it's the, I don't know if I might turn it over to you. I may not be explaining that correctly. Try? I'm gonna let her try. She's better at VMT.
Yeah. So it's, as Joelle was saying, the state's guidance when it comes to VMT, truck traffic is assumed to. It's tied more to your land use, what's driving it, what's causing the demand for the truck traffic, and for when we were looking at changes in proposed land uses out here, there is a component of retail. There was also assumed a lot of office space, which was going to generate a lot of employee trips. And that's really where you see that trade-off, is there's going to be a lot fewer, I'm looking at the modeling here, tens of thousands of trips fewer for office employees versus the warehousing that we're seeing going out there now.
So are the trucks counted in VMT? I'm just trying to figure out whether this is what she's saying is correct, that the trucks are not counted toward VMT.
The truck trips themselves are generally not accounted for in VMT. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, well, that answers my question. Thank you. Commissioner Corona Sabaniano?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. I just have a clarification, or asking for a clarification on something that you mentioned regarding the signs. Mm-hmm. If I heard correctly, there is an option in the report for to move forward with, was it on-site but not the freeway signs? So just maybe if you can clarify that a little bit.
Right. Mm-hmm. So attachment 2 to your report package includes a red line and clean version of the master signage program with MAPOA's proposed changes. And so that is included, and should the Planning Commission and Board recommend that those changes be made, those will be incorporated into the final landscape and design guidelines. What I was noting was that when the Design Review Advisory Committee reviewed those proposed changes, that they had recommended that they not be incorporated into the or they were not supportive of those MAPOA changes. However, if the board did decide to make changes to the master signage program, that they only be made to the monument signs and not to the freeway signs.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. And then just one other question in terms of the change in the industrial manufacturing acreage. Is that, I guess I understand the proximity, right? The interest of applicants to be near the airport. But in the assessment, I know you said today there's interest. Just wondering about if at all it was taken into consideration future interest, just because throughout the city we see so many of these vacant buildings. But just curious if that was considered.
Yeah, there's currently a significant amount of demand, as well as, and those are both projects that are in progress and being moved through a non-discretionary design review process. In addition to that, both myself and my team, we've held a number of pre-application meetings with potential applicants. We have staff from our County Economic Development Office that are here this evening, and they are meeting with a number of other folks that are interested in pursuing industrial or logistics centers or warehouse and distribution. So again, I think given the location of Metro Air Park being proximate to the freeways, proximate to the airport, I think there's some unique locational advantages where there's just a significant amount of interest in this product type.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions for now.
Thank you. I've just got, kind of want to dig in a little bit about the proximate development to the light rail. 1992 was a long time ago. Was there a green line proposed in 1992, and was this an optional station when the Metro Air Park was established? I know this
That's
is
a great question.
I know it's a tough
and
question. I was in middle school, so I don't remember.
Yeah, I am actually not certain if it was at the time of the original Metro Air Park station. I'm sure when Mr. Ramos provides his presentation, he'll be able to let you all know. But I know that it has been an optional station for quite some time. I don't know if back in 1992 or 93.
Can I add, there were some earlier maps where they incorporated these irrevocable offers of dedication for the light rail line coming through?
That's right.
Was that 98?
That was 1998.
98? They're not listening.
I believe it was 1998.
About 1998.
Was that amendment package. So definitely at that time, the green line was proposed. It was in 93. Yeah, so the green line was a thing.
And so even though the green line was established, there weren't any changes to the plan to restrict the transit-oriented development has
That's
come about
correct.
more recently with the push for transit-oriented development in general around all light rail stations. That's where it's more coming from than historical, kind of, the history of them being connected together.
That's correct.
Okay.
Absolutely correct.
And then your staff recommendation is if we are going to restrict it or ask that you guys come back with a proposal to restrict it, then we would stick to 1/8 of a mile. And I was just curious if we could get looks like county in general, we start restrictions at 1/2 mile right now. I saw the map and I see 1/2 mile is almost half the air park is what it looks like on a map. So could you just kind of go in a little more detail about why 1/8 of a mile versus 1/4 versus 1/2?
Yeah, I think it's exactly given the sort of line of questioning and discussion that we were having earlier about just the optional nature of this station and the timing of the line itself. And I think given the amount of development interest that's out there now, I think the interest would be from staff's standpoint in looking at a smaller geographic area than a larger, given those reasons.
Okay. And then I just kind of wanted to run through numbers because I was looking at kind of the original industrial uses versus what is proposed. And I know I had some follow-up questions with you today, but just kind of for the record, originally had about 400, a little less than 500 acres of non-industrial uses on this site. And where we could end up with as low as basically the 23 acres that are in this 5A and 3A, and then about 100 acres remaining in those other restricted ones because of the difference between the 300 acres. Is that so? We'd be down about 122 acres left of this as non-industrial. It's a minimum.
That sounds about right. I'm assuming you're including also the District 6, which is the open space area as well.
Yeah, that's 275 acres is what I'm showing here on the table.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. Any further questions for staff before we move on? Commissioner Bora?
Thank you, Chris. Please don't get tired of me. I appreciate the staff too. Really, really appreciate your guys' questions. I've been in your shoes many, many times, so forgive me. But I might have missed this, but under FAA review, so SACOG would be the ALUCP for this. Has the FAA or any ALUC guidance changed since the original proposals with the SPA? So, for example, if we were to increase the hotel, and again, this is where I kind of came in with the density example, because any area that's within a public use airport needs to meet a certain amount of density requirement, even if it's not, even if it's temporary housing like a hotel. So, has SACOG's ALUCP or FAA's quarterly? I'm seeing some folks saying no, or
The question is whether or not things have changed by the FAA that would affect the land use since it was originally adopted. I don't believe so. I think those original restrictions are in place, and I don't think that there's anything that's been modified. I would ask the applicants to maybe address that when they came up.
Okay.
They deal with FAA review quite a bit, but I don't believe so.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty standard. In fact, it's probably getting more strict.
yeah, I just don't want to get us to a point where we approve the change uses and then there happens to be like a density requirement that FAA should have given us a guidance already. Therefore, then we might have to kind of go back again. So again, another external factor. But that's it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate the options and appreciate your detailed presentation. Thank you. I'll go ahead and invite the applicant up this evening. And we'll start by getting you guys sworn in together.
Okay.
Please raise your right hand. And swear that the testimony you're about to give this commission is the truth, so help you God.
I do.
You did swear, so when you go to the podium, I'm so sorry, you guys. Please please state your name for the record and make the statement I have been sworn.
Okay.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Tom Ramus, and I have been sworn. Good evening, Chair Rathel and commissioners. I'm representing the Metro Air Park owners, and it's great to be back here in front of everyone as we continue to support and improve the development of Metro Air Park. And I want to compliment staff on a pretty thorough and comprehensive presentation. So I got some prepared remarks here. Hopefully, I won't be copying too much of what they've already said, but let's go through it. And then I think I can answer a little more detail on some of the questions that you've brought up earlier. But like they said, we were last here in 2018 and 2019 with zoning updates. Well, a lot has happened at MAP since then. He mentioned the I-5 Metro Air Parkway interchange was completed and opened last summer, and that's our front door, and it's been has attracted a lot of interest at Metro Air Park. Also, in 2020, we updated our public finance plan, which was much needed in order to finally implement the fee program out there, and it opened the door for multiple building projects that have either since been completed or are currently ongoing. And then finally, earlier this year, an enhanced infrastructure finance district was established at MAP, and that brings stability and certainty to the build-out and the needed public infrastructure. And that was very important because there was some uncertainty out there of how the whole project would be funded in the end, and the EFID provides that certainty and stability that, again, is what's attracting the interests out there now. But also, a lot's changed in the commercial real estate market as well since then. COVID and the explosion of e-commerce has brought an increased emphasis in warehouse and distribution uses and has suppressed the market for new office. Our original mixed zoning use, dating back to 1989, I think. He said 1993, but I think there was an earlier one that was kind of an initial mixed-use plan, included the flexibility to allow up to 69 acres of industrial-type uses in the commercial office districts. That doesn't mean that 69 acres were going to be built. It's just that the option was there. No one knows how that 69-acre number came about, but it became very clear recently that it is too limiting. And although the amendment before you this evening contains many different updates, that was the original sole impetus of our application, as Chris had said, was to increase the cap. We now have multiple projects pending the completion of this increase in this amendment, so the urgency that Chris mentioned earlier. It doesn't mean we'll see 300 acres of developed distribution uses additional. It means it will probably be less, but the increase gives us the flexibility in the market. Things may change. We may see more office. It has great potential out there, but that's just not the market at this point. With the increase, there will still be about 120 acres of commercial office and retail use, so your calculations were pretty darn close. And likewise, the increase in hotel uses from 30 to 40 acres allows the flexibility. There have been multiple hotel projects have been submitted, and we don't want to limit the amount of submissions and being able to have the market there. The market will dictate how many of them finally secure financing and are eventually built. After our application to increase the cap was submitted, county staff approached us using the opportunity to address some of the items in the ordinance and design guidelines that they felt should be addressed. And as you've seen, most of them were cleanup items. However, 2 items, the transit-oriented use around the potential light rail station and the use of corporate logos in the master sign program, have not been resolved. In a minute, Nick Advis will comment on these items on behalf of some of the landowners that are specifically affected by these issues. But first, I want to explain MAP's owner's position. We welcome and support a light rail station at MAP. It is a very important component of our transportation system management plan and a way to reduce vehicle trips. We did, with our 2004 large lot map, dedicate right-of-way and land for the potential light rail station. But the transit-oriented building policies that were created long after the MAP SPA was entitled have conflicting land uses. In the case of MAP, we envision the station not just serving the surrounding area, but the entire park. Employment centers are dispersed throughout the park. And the internal air shuttle, the internally driven clean air shuttle, which will be developed and expanded over time, will be the vehicle, no pun intended, that will connect employees, visitors to the station and promote convenient transit use. A year or so back, planning issued a determination on the general plan policy LU 32, which addresses land use around the light rail station, and stated that MAP requirements should rule. We agree with that, and thus support the board's recommendation for option 1, no additional modifications to the SPA. On the master sign program update, MAP supports the alternative option, which would allow color with corporate logos and names. It is important to potential users and tenants to be able for them to be able to present their highly developed branding that customers are familiar with and will respond to. Finally, along with the SP update, the county requests we've been working on the TSMP update, which included updating the air quality management plan as well. Our consultants, Transportation Management System, who's here tonight, is working closely with staff and with the Air Quality District to develop and update the plans that have received district approval and hopefully your concurrence this evening. TSM is here to answer any questions and get a little more detail that you might have on the different programs, including JIVE that you mentioned earlier. I'll be available to answer questions after Nick talks, but I just want to bring up a few things that you guys brought up on your questioning. Number one, Caltrans. We work very closely with them on the interchange. There are several other additional improvements and widening of the interchange and stuff. That area of I-5 is a special trade corridor, and there's been special monies that have been allocated out there to provide additional auxiliary lanes. Our finance plan also includes funding for a third lane out there, which will become about not maybe by finance partially by us or other monies, but everyone knows that's coming. It's a very important corridor out there. Most of the traffic is going between LA and who knows where. So, we're going to do our part. But actually, as they discussed earlier, if there is a larger percentage of these distribution type uses, the actual traffic counts are significantly lower than a retail or office environment. Yes, there are a few more trucks, but the overall trip count is significantly lower. E-commerce is kind of a funny thing. There's been a lot of studies being done and are coming out, and intuitively you'd think that all these Amazon trucks and whatnot running around neighborhoods, is increasing trips. And actually it's the exact opposite. You have people going to different stores at different times. If they can order at home, you got these companies are very efficient in how they route people and how they do it. And the overall VMTs is probably significantly lower than the status quo. So we'll see how that works out as we go along. I guess that's about it for now. I'll hand it over to Nick, and we'll answer any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Nick Avdis, Thomas Law Group. I have been sworn. I just got a few points here. Thanks to staff. I know this is really complicated. There's a lot of multiple layers here, and they've worked very hard to keep this schedule on track to get these SPA amendments before the Board of Supervisors. They're very important out there. It's a very critical time for Metro Air Park, obviously, with the economy and the amount of development out there. So it's important that this move along in an expeditious manner, I think, to take advantage of the foreseeable economic climate as it relates to the types of land uses that are advantageous out at Metro Air Park. So with that, I wanted to just drill down on a couple things on the master signage program as well as the light rail stop. As to the signage, feel pretty strongly that the signage is that currently restricts using color on the freeway signage and monument signs as well as corporate logos is having an effect and is being seen as less attractive to potential users out in Metro Air Park. And while I appreciate all the staff's analysis, I kind of disagree with the conclusion that, by maintaining a monochromatic sign out at Metro Air Park, you're maintaining a sense of place. I mean, first of all, Metro Air Park, as special as it is, it's an industrial park near an airport next to an interstate freeway interchange. And I want to show you a couple of signs. Can I get the overhead here? Here's not too far. So this first image that will be momentarily up on the board. So you can kind of see it. You can kind of zoom up on that. That's actually maybe a mile south of Metro Air Park. It's on the east side of I-5 between Arena Boulevard and Del Paso Road. You can see it's kind of a monochromatic sign. You can kind of tell that, as you're driving by, the type of people that, Metro Air Park is not a destination. It is off a freeway interchange. And when drivers are driving by, that's what potentially they see. And here's an example of something south of, Arena Boulevard, east of I-5, just to kind of give you a sense on the impact that corporate logos and the sign colors have on passersby. So I think, when you look at those two examples, I think it illustrates what we're talking about. I don't think we're not asking to redesign the signs. They're still very unique and still create that uniqueness in the shape and the style. But all we're asking for is the color. So with that. I would ask you to recommend to the board that they do include adoption of the alternative that we set forth or support in the staff report relative to allowing colors and corporate logos. As it relates to the issue of the light rail station, we've established, first of all, that, no residential is permitted in Metro Air Park. The light rail stop is optional and is at some point, our desire is for it to be constructed. We certainly want that to happen. I also represent the adjacent project, the North Lake project, formerly known as Greenbrier. We'll touch on the traffic thing. I just remembered on that. So we're very anxious to see that happen. The reality is it could be decades away. It was actually supposed to be built decades ago. So I don't feel that we're any less closer to realizing the dream that we all have. And, I'm certainly one of them. I'm a third generation Natoman, and I've seen Natomas grow and thrive and become the community it is today. So I have certainly a certain vantage point as it relates to development. Natomas is kind of near and dear to me personally. But the reality is if we start limiting land uses in Metro Air Park, again, it's right off a freeway interchange. What we're talking about here is we have small landowners that have purchased these properties in the vicinity of this light rail stop with the investment-backed expectations. As recently as last year, the planning director made a determination, on LU 32, which is in your staff report, and people relied on those. That we can't have like what you think of TOD in like Midtown at Metro Air Park. I mean, while it may sound, when you say it, it sounds great, but in reality, it's not that. And if you adopt restrictions to land uses this close to an optional light rail stop, I'll tell you what's going to happen out to those parcels there in the eighth of a mile, whatever, quarter of a mile, half a mile. Nothing is going to happen because of the type of density and the floor area ratios that are talked about out there. It's impossible to achieve that in this market in that location. So I would urge you to also support option one, which is do nothing other than what's been planned and expected this whole time out at Metro Air Park. We do have, as Tom mentioned, the TSMP. There's an integrated transportation system to facilitate movement of employees within Metro Air Park. Metro Air Park is, 2 miles end to end, mile and a half? I mean, it's a big park, and the reality is limiting land uses around a 1/8 of a mile, for example, of the light rail stop really isn't going to move the needle. So with that, I appreciate it and happy to answer any questions. As it relates to Mr. Tatishi's earlier question about North Lake and concerns about I think it was you, Mr. Tatishi, about increase in truck traffic in the vicinity. We do have, obviously, lots of landowners, homeowners that have now moved into North Lake. I think the bigger concern, if I may put that hat on for a second, is not the potential increase in traffic from the changes that are proposed here, because there isn't one, first of all. And even if you see a switch from, say, commuter traffic going to offices and people going to commercial opportunities, and you kind of swap that with heavy trucks. I think the bigger problem out there is illegal truck parking on Elkhorn Boulevard. I mean, if you go out there this evening, you'll see 20 trucks parked on the shoulder at Elkhorn. That's because, there's, I'm going to say, contrary to the zoning out there are people storing trucks, and there's a big demand for parking trucks somewhere. And that, honestly, the biggest complaint we've heard from new homeowners is that. So I would say that is a much bigger concern for that development than what traffic increase maybe would occur as a result of the SPA before you. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Avdis and Mr. Ramos. Questions this evening from the commissioners? Commissioner Borja.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos and Mr. Avdis. Appreciate the pictures. Just a quick question. On the ALUCP, and Mr. Ramos, you might have presented this many moons ago on the ALUC with the Board of Supervisors, but would there be any issue should FAA come in and say that this is not kind of copacetic to any of their requirements? Or would that require us to hear this again if the FAA does stop in, or Caltrans? I mean, I just want to make sure that FAA is going to be one of your first roadblocks there.
There's a requirement for all projects to submit to the FAA and get a whatever form it is, but basically they sign off to the project as part of their application to the county. Okay. So there's height restrictions out there, but they're significantly high, and the fact that we're alongside the runways and not in the front, it's fairly limited. But they do review it for glass and different things to make sure that we're not interfering with stuff. And our densities are, you brought that up earlier. They're low enough. They don't conflict with anything in the airport operating plan.
Okay. Thank you. And then one last question for Mr. Avdis. Oh, go ahead, sir.
Can I add something to that? Because Tom, he raises a good point. In terms of the ALUC, there's employment density depending on the safety zone that you're located in. And for this particular project, we're in a certain safety zone, and the density is low enough where that is not a problem. However, with the transit use to me, it's kind of a squishy thing right now. I can't tell exactly what it is, but what it means is you have more people in a smaller space to achieve, I think, what in theory is sought here, which also bumps up against the ALUC as a potential problem as well. So I just want to point that out. Yeah,
there would be more people next to airports, whereas the ALUC would protect people from airports or airplanes, right? I totally get it. Thank you for that, sir. And then for the signage, if we were to go with the recommendations, I want to make sure that they're in line with Caltrans's ODA, outdoor advertising requirements for anything that's close to the freeway and easement. So if I'm hoping that both versions, whether the
yes. Okay, they're consistent with that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions this evening? All right, thank you, gentlemen. And with that, we'll go ahead and open up public comment. I've got one comment card so far. If I'll try to get it right. Mr. Kosarev? And clerk, do you need to get him sworn in for public comment, or?
Not for public.
All right, you have the floor. You have 3 minutes.
My family and I go on the weekends. We run our errands and haircuts, groceries, sporting goods, that type of stuff. And towards the end of the afternoon, I'll look back to my 3-year-old daughter and I'll ask her, "What color is that star?" And she can't read. She knows a few letters, few numbers. But she looks at it, and her eyes are bigger than her stomach. And she looks back at me, smiling, looks back at the star, smiling, looks at me, smiling, because she knows what's coming. See, she sees the yellow star, and she knows her father's going to take her to Carl's Jr. to buy her some ice cream. She knows she's going to be the happiest little girl. She needs those colors. Many people do. We need lights. This is a 24-hour operation, this air park and the airport. This is not a daytime only destination. This is 24 hours. We need not just black and gray colors with a white or amber light shining upon the sign. Also, I'm in favor of raising the industrial cap, and with the problems with the truck parking that we do have now, And I own that property where that light rail station is going to be, and the freeway sign. And I plan to build a truck stop and hotels, and this truck parking where I plan to put it there near the light rail. I had this opportunity when I purchased the ground. And now that this may change, I'm stuck in a position where I don't know what my options are now. Whether I need compensation for the change or how I pivot to make a change. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. All right, and do we have further public comments this evening?
We do. We have one caller on the line. Let me ask staff to send them down. Please send the first caller. Hello, caller. You're now in the meeting. You'll have 3 minutes to make your comment. Please get started.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. This is Jeff Erbrick with David Babcock and Associates. We had prepared the original Metro Air Park signage program and also the alternative which you are looking at tonight. We feel very strongly about moving forward with the color version, and the reason being is one is most corporate companies that are out there now have spent a lot of money on their branding and their identity, and they use that as a visual cue in order to attract people to their businesses. And at Metro Air Park, not only is it the businesses that you would derive from the drive-by traffic on Highway 5 or Highway 99, it's also going to be the people in the business park themselves using those and providing goods and services to the tenants within the business park and also to the tenants within the warehouse and distribution uses. What we've also seen is that with corporate tenants is that this branding is a very important aspect of their business. And if they do not get it, there is in a lot of cases we've seen that they do move on to other localities and other sites where they can get the signage, the colors, the logos, and whatever else they want. So what does that do for Metro Air Park? It kind of puts them at a disadvantage in that they may not be able to attract all of the brand name tenants that you're looking at out there. And it also means that you're going, you may lose out on a tenant mix which provides goods and services not only to the county, but as I discussed, to the tenants. But then you're also going to miss out on those tax dollars that are derived from these businesses coming to this site. So it does become a very important aspect of how businesses use advertising nowadays, given that the retail development is in a very challenging market. It is very tough for them to operate. And all of these advantages mean to them that they are able to stay in business. They're able to provide the goods and services not only to the community, but then also the business park. And I'd be happy to answer any questions and ask for your support on changing the sign ordinance or the sign program that's within the current Metro Air Park and adopt the color version. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And do we have any other further public comments this evening?
There are no further.
All right. With that, we'll go ahead and close public comment, and we'll invite the applicant, if they would like to respond to any of those public comments, they're welcome to. All right. Hearing none, we'll go on and move on to Commissioner deliberation.
Just a suggestion as you guys are deliberating, it might help to think about how you're going to vote on this. It's not going to be as simple as moving the staff recommendation or not moving it. You might want to separate out some of these elements of what's being applied for here, like take the signage separately, take the light rail part of it separately, and So you can make separate motions for those things.
Sounds like a great plan. All right, let's get started on signage then.
Mr. Chairman, I have thoughts.
Commissioner Tishi?
So as somebody who travels quite a bit for the professional job, I'm on the highways quite a bit, and I will say that, I agree with the notion that the cues on color and logos is very helpful for me as I'm traveling a road. It's one thing if I'm looking at a residential neighborhood where you're trying to think of a smaller commercial corridor within, the residence, but this is freeway signage for a off-ramp and on-ramp that is dedicated to a commercial and industrial park itself. So I don't see it as something that is looking at a neighborhood feel in that sense, and it's also adjacent to the airport. So this is something where if you're coming in off the highway, traveling north to south into Sacramento, this is kind of your first exposure into Sacramento County, Sacramento City, as well as, from my opinion, if you're coming off the airport, I think it's important for visitors coming into our county to recognize as you kind of come right into our community, who's here. We have some impressive employers that are and businesses that are coming into the Metro Air Park. I think we should be able to and should be proud of being able to showcase those folks who are choosing Sacramento in that sense. So from a signage standpoint, I think we should show flexibility to these businesses and allow them to showcase their logos and their colors on the signage. I have other thoughts on the other items too, but since we're just taking signage, I'll pause there.
All right, thanks for pausing there. I'm going to pause this even further. We had one more public commenter that did not get the opportunity, so we are going to go back and reopen the public comment period.
Please send the next caller. Hello, caller. You're now in the meeting. You'll have 3 minutes to make your public comment.
I do appreciate it, everyone. Thank you. Sorry for the misconnection. My name is Cohen Schur. I work for SAC-RT. I'm the senior planner and the project manager for the Green Line. I just wanted to call in because I was listening today and just wanted to clarify a couple comments. First of all, the station for Air Metro Park is still in the draft EIR that was internally reviewed by SAC-RT in 2019. As a project manager, we are asked to look at stations over time for viability. So I'm calling today to basically ask the Planning Commission to consider developments that would create transit trips. Understand that the station does not have a planned parking ride. All trips to the station will be walking or drop off. So that's where the requests and working with staff, which has been very beneficial to us over the last couple of months talking about this item, is what we're looking for is developments that will allow people to walk, be dropped off, or walk closely enough. So high density, something of housing, hotel, restaurants, mixed use. But it's very common for us every so often to look at stations that are planned and still see if there is justification for those stations over time. This is a longstanding project for SAC-RT, but I just wanted to call in real quickly to let you know that it's still in our draft EIR and that we appreciate the staff working with us and considering any projects that would be built around this station are viable for inducing transit versus vehicle trips. So I just want to take a quick moment and call in and thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much for calling in this evening. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and close the public comment again and ask the applicant if you would like to respond.
We've been working with that on moving forward on the project, so that's good he made his comments, but I just want to reiterate what I said before, is that we envision this stop servicing the whole park as a whole and complementing our shuttle service to bring people to it, just like he mentioned. So it's not an urban setting per se. There is multiple hotels and stuff that are in the have submitted applications along the line and in that area. They may not necessarily be adjacent right to the light rail or within that 1/8 of a mile, but they are within the 1/4 mile. So that will generate some traffic specifically, at least from the airport to that location. But overall, it's being able to support all the employment that's throughout the park. So hopefully you'll consider that as we go.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. All right, Commissioner Borja, you are up next.
Thank you. And I'd like to agree with our colleagues and the presenters on the sign sentiments, and I'd be more than happy to take a stab at least that motion to provide the county flexibility. I'm losing out on my words here, but there was option number 2, if I recall correctly.
Let's hold off on a motion just for a second. Okay. I'd like to make a few comments, and we have somebody else on deck, too.
Okay, understood.
Commissioner Corona Sabignano?
I was just going to echo the same. I agree. I think the color in the sign, with the logo, I think would bring great benefit to drivers and people that are coming to our community. So when it's appropriate, I would second that motion.
All right, I'll take a stab at trying to convince you guys otherwise. I want to give my comments. You know, I look at freeway signs that are there. He brought up one freeway sign that's directly to the south of there that we're all pretty familiar with as we drive to the airport. And I would imagine a number of you, even though their logo and their colors are not on there, can think of 5 or 6 businesses that are in that shopping center as you drive past it every time. I look at, other freeway monument signs that are out there. Personally, I like the monochromatic, and the text variation does give them that. It's not saying that they can't necessarily have their font that is there, but what it is saying is that we don't want it to have, 19 or 300 different colors on that sign. You know, you could have people that have a variety of different logos on there, and we would say that all of those colors are acceptable. So to me, the freeway monument signs that are made up of that many colors are an eyesore. I guess the other thing that I think is that this isn't a sign criteria that we somehow made up at the county, right? This was a sign criteria that was made up by the applicant just a few years ago and submitted in order to provide consistency with their development. And now I understand you get pressure from large corporations that are coming in that are saying, I need you to change this signage in order for me to move in. But I can think of a number of other large developments that have monochromatic signs that are along our freeways, and they don't seem to have issues with recognition of who the tenants are that are there. So, I guess I would be okay with signage changes as we get closer into development. If staff would correct me, or maybe I can ask this question now, there's nothing restricting them from colored logoed signage on their building, as I read the sign criteria.
On their building, no. And one of the things that I should have noted was that even on their monument signs, currently there is a prohibition. They do have to be monochromatic. However, there is a special development permit option for applicants to request a deviation for monument signs if they wanted to do their corporate colors or logos on a individual monument sign. We've had a couple of larger industrial users that have contemplated submittal of a special development permit to deviate. However, that is at the Planning Commission level, that request for a special development permit, and they have since decided not to pursue that and have complied with the requirements in the master signage program.
So I just wanted to kind of throw those thoughts out there. That's my view of it. Is I think it actually would fit. Help the development, maintain consistency. Like I said, I'd be fine with looking at things further into the center. That's up for change, but especially that's a really large freeway monument sign, and I think it kind of says 2020 to have a monochromatic monument sign, whereas the very large sign that has multicolors says not 2020. I would say 1990s, or some development of the developments past had these very erratic signs, I think, in my opinion. but I'm open to others' thoughts. I already heard 3 people say they like the color, so.
And I guess I might as well chime in as well. I've really been on the fence on this because on one hand, as some of my fellow commissioners have pointed out, these are businesses. The whole point is to attract customers. And how do they do that? Through their signage and their logos that they have spent. I'm not even going to try and guess how many hours and money on marketing and everything like that. But at the same time, like our chair has stated, this was something that the applicant had come up with. And, and this is a part of, the signage program that they developed. And it would be, if a tenant decides to go in there, that's their choice. Knowing that they would only have a monochromatic signage. I think the thing that kind of ultimately swayed me in our chair's position is the fact that Mr. Pahuli brought up the good point that there is an opportunity for them to have a deviation in the future. And so if they do want to do, all of the colors and everything, they can. It's not necessarily set in stone.
Any other comments?
I can appreciate all of the sentiments there, and in certain communities I agree with the monochromatic. I see this park right next to the airport as a unique kind of marker for us, and that's why, again, if I drive down 50, 85, 99, and I can see where you're entering what are communities. As much as this is a community, this is also our international hub as the airport. It's a huge part of where we're seeing business thriving in a different way. And so I do feel that the color and the ability to kind of leverage the logos just puts a planter in that spot. So I'm not saying universally I would agree that we need colors up and down the highways in all of our communities, but I do see this as a unique marker and a unique space for Sacramento County.
All right, the applicant would really like to speak for a second. We're in the middle of Commissioner deliberation. Go ahead.
Just real quick, we just want to make sure you understand that the monochromatic was not something that we were acceptable to back in 2018. We advocated then for the color signage. Staff had their ideas, which they still do today, and we needed to move on at that time, and we did. And so we're approaching it again. We appreciate them this time allowing the discussion to become more open. So that's where we are. But we've always supported the use of color in the signage.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Commissioner Borja, did you want to make the motion or do you?
Yes, I'd still like to make the motion that I had made a couple minutes ago, and thank you so much for your feedback and your insight, Chair and Commissioner Wong. That is the motion that I'm going with. Thank you.
And do you want to clarify what that motion is for the record?
Yes, the motion is to allow for the flexibility. I believe it's option 2 on the staff report, or
It's attachment 2.
Attachment 2.
Which is the MAPOA proposed changes.
Understood.
Can you show that up on the screen by chance real quick? Do we have? Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
That was not the staff, right? The
that
staff
wasn't-
recommendation
yeah,
was
that
to
wasn't
reject,
staff
so it would be to
recommendation.
go against staff recommendation.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, I have a motion on the floor to go against staff recommendation and to allow colors and logos. Is that across the board? Is that what the?
Well, I think attaching the motion, designating, if you can, the attachment you mentioned, what was it, attachment 2?
Let's pull it up here.
Attachment 2 to the staff
That is
report.
the applicant's alternative?
Yes.
That should be part of your motion?
Correct.
Yes. My motion is to go against staff recommendation, but also support the alternative number 2. Is that?
Alternative and attachment 2.
Oh, attachment 2, yeah.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion before I call for vote? All right, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Wong.
No.
right, the motion then passes.
And the motion does carry.
And I'll go ahead and move us on to the light rail and transit-oriented development discussion. And who's going to be the first to push the button? Commissioner Tatishi, you are up.
Thank you. And I think on this one, I appreciate that SACRT called in to clarify that it's still in their draft documents to continue forward with a stop there. I am curious to know on the timeline on that still, just because the funding is going to be huge. Just getting the costs that I know that over the past at least 5-6 years as they've been looking at the Green Line, and more than that, 10 years, the costs has continued to escalate on building that out. And so I'm curious on what the phases of the Green Line are going to be and the timeline that this could happen, because I am concerned about anything that would potentially hinder. When you look at those, the half mile and the quarter mile, I'm not supportive of either of those. I could look at the 8th, as staff is recommending, as something that could be a reasonable approach. I'm also okay with the no modifications to the SPA as it stands right now. We knew that the light rail was coming at that point too, and if that was okay at that time, I'm very worried about the timing and I'll say a promise of something to come that is yet to really materialize in any way, shape, or form from a funding mechanism, and holding up the potential developments there for, a hypothetical really good thing, but still a hypothetical really good thing.
Thank you so much. I am in the same boat as you. I hate to take away a property right that a landowner has when they purchase that property, especially in a development that is very competitive, and to suddenly, because of changes in how we're interpreting things, change our requirements for what that property is. And I understand sometimes that can be justified, but I'm very hesitant to ever do that without significant justification, and I just don't see that significant justification here. So I lean toward the no modifications to the SPA, and everyone knows where that should be, where that light rail optional station may be one day. So I definitely encourage development that would take advantage of that, and definitely would encourage saying, we need room for that shuttle stop to be there, because it looks like so much of that transit plan centers on all of those amenities that make this possible. That whole transportation plan possible is right around that light rail. So, but at this point, since it's been around and in, I wouldn't say conflict, but in cooperation for many decades, I would lean toward option number 1.
Can I? Just a clarifying question on this one is, I guess as I understand option 2, we're not necessarily prohibiting today anything, right? It would be going back to the staff, coming back with a report. I mean, some of these uses, as was described during public comment, could still be built there, but it would just be not by right. Is that correct, or?
Yeah, so option 2 would then begin a process of initiating further amendments to the land use table. And so there would be certain uses that we would assume would be prohibited and some that might be conditionally permitted. But that would start a process by which we would figure out which ones would be which would need to be included in that land use table as those options.
Okay.
And there would, I think you brought it up, there could be a potential, just to kind of lay it out there, an urgency ordinance that would hold processing of those identified uses if they were in for like a use permit until we brought this additional amendment through. So that would have an impact on any property owners that are looking to develop in,
In the near term.
In the near term,
Right.
yeah.
Forgive me, sorry for the interruption. Just to clarify that point, are you saying there are potentially applications that are coming through right now that would be considered prohibited? I mean, it's like we actually have...
Potentially. We do have a filed application as noted in the report package for a gas station immediately across the street from the optional or future light rail station. I think typically you would think that a gas station would be a prohibited use.
Right.
There are a number, as I showed on the tentative map. The parcelization seems to lend itself to fast food establishments, which potentially could be either prohibited or, and I don't mean fast food with drive-through or car washes or things like that, that could be either prohibited or conditionally permitted. So yes, there are applications filed as well as interest for potential projects.
So this, if we were to pick hypothetically number 2, it would trigger a need for an urgency clause or an urgency ordinance from the board to stop pending or existing applications.
If the board was concerned with projects potentially being approved prior to the changes being made, then yes, that would be the direction that they would then provide to staff, would be not only to make not only to prepare an amendment, but also to prepare an urgency ordinance so that projects would not be able to move forward until that was considered.
Got it. So we'd literally be pulling the rug out under some applicants, in essence, who are in motion on a hypothetical project that we hope in some amount of time would happen if we didn't pick number 1, potentially.
Correct. Yeah. I would also say that the project that we just mentioned, the one that has a filed application, is a conditionally permitted use to the Board of Supervisors, and so there's also a certain level of uncertainty for projects that are conditionally permitted that have to work through that process in order to get to a decision point about whether or not they are going to be approved or not.
But that's a process, and you go through the board. It's a process that we would do in any kind of conditional use dynamic versus changing or restricting use in essence, whereas right now they're going through a process where they're just following a process, then we would change it on them potentially.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with this too, we'd be upping this to possibly 1,300 acres of logistics centers. Obviously, clearly, a lot of traffic, right? I get it. It may not look the same as office. It may be different type of traffic, but it probably needs a gas station more than it needs a light rail station. If we get rid of all of the office, then pretty much all the office. Other thoughts? All right, I'll go ahead and Commissioner Boyle, are you reaching for your button there? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's a bit of a conundrum that we're here because I very much hear you, Commissioner Tateishi, about we have a draft DIR for the Green Line, but we have a potential easement, but we do not have the actual transit connection there yet, and so I would be hesitant to prevent any future development for something that might not be there. But also, I'm having some challenge about should a project in a right-of-way go through there, then perhaps at that time, our future selves would have the opportunity to then take a look whether or not that project meets any TOD ordinance in that immediate area. Because right now, there is no transit there. There's a plan. So that's kind of where I'm having a little bit of a concern. But for option number 2, Mr. Pahuli, wouldn't that also just trigger, like, let's say, and I don't want to assume, but let's say RT does come and say within the next year, we're going to make that into a station, regardless of what decision we make now. Wouldn't at that point in time, the powers that be can just consider or reconcile whether or not it meets any of the TOD ordinances that might be there at that time? I guess I'm just having a really tough time of voting if it's not there yet.
I mean, certainly a decision can be made later at some point to then impose some sort of overlay or some additional mechanism once the line is a little bit more imminent. The risk there being that once development occurs, it's very unlikely that it will reposition or redevelop, in any near term. So that is sort of the issue there.
Understood. Thank you.
So just a follow-up question. So when we think of the prohibited uses that you all would be having to develop, are those uses at this point, at least, are those all things that have to get approval from the Board of Supervisors? Or are there things that could just move forward that would be, I would say, prohibited in the future if this were to go forward? Or are all those, in theory, prohibited items have to be something the board is going to be approving anyway?
Yeah, I think as noted in the staff report, the only one that we identified that currently would require a use permit to the board that you would just intuitively think of as not transit supportive would be gas stations. But I think we noted drive-through restaurants, car washes, self-storage facilities, which I know when the city embarked on their transit-oriented development overlay, it was a self-storage facility at 65th Street at their light rail station that was the impetus for that effort. So those types of uses are all permitted by right in the SPA ordinance currently, the only one being the gas station that would be a conditional use permit in the SPA.
Got it. Okay. I'm still of the opinion at this point. I mean, we've known, again, this light rail has been, I think someone said since 89 or 93, at least when this project was beginning too. So I guess the differences are our thinking has evolved, I guess, over time, and we've learned to maybe plan differently. But throughout all those steps, I'm not sure why we've been telling the applicant in theory they could be planning for these types of applications, and now we're coming to change it. I don't feel comfortable advocating for anything but option one.
So I'm struggling with this one as well, but I don't think that I'm comfortable with option one. I'm more comfortable with a combination of option 2 and 3, so as to not prohibit, but allow for some public process for these applications to come forward, whether it's to us or to the Board of Supervisors. I think that's where I'm kind of leaning towards. I think things do change, and maybe I would feel differently later, but I think based on the information that we have here today, this is kind of the direction that I'm leaning towards.
I'll just throw out one example in another jurisdiction that I'm familiar with, and that we have put in TOD overlays. And the idea behind that is that you do have some uses that are already there that are not transit friendly, right? But the idea is that once hopefully that use, if you make it prohibited going forward, it doesn't stop the current owner from exercising their rights. But then if it does change, it would be more transit friendly in 20 years or 30 years. And it also would allow them different development rights. The TOD overlay isn't just restricting uses, but a lot of times it can be used to increase the ability, like increase residential density around the TOD, whereas in this case, that isn't an option. So I think this is a little bit different than your typical, it'll be a little bit different than your typical TOD overlay sort of situation, just because it is, it's there. But it's really tough for me because that light rail line makes the most sense of any light rail line that would ever be built, I think. And so it's tough to argue that the closest station there wouldn't be given the best options going forward. But
I just wish we had assurances that the money was going to be there to actually build it. Because if it's another 10 or 20 years, but we sit here with prohibited uses on properties that are ready now to be developed. That's really my concern on this. And again, if anyone, if any of our members of Congress or our governor were able to say we have the money and we're going and we know in 3-4 years it will be built, I actually could see all of this right now going with an option 2, what have you, because there's a realistic timeline. I'm still in a position where we have a really good idea that has been put in motion for almost 30 years, and we still don't have the funding to get there. And I don't feel comfortable with speculating on a timeline and then prohibiting what are already in motion applications on a hypothetical that, in theory, 20 years, if it does get built, that property could change over, and then we could be coming back to have discussions around that.
Commissioner Wong?
Yes, I just have one question. Does anyone know, I guess, what the holdup has been for the light rail? Is it funding? Is it?
It's funding.
It's all funding? Okay, so it's not like.
Back when I was working in the House of Representatives, RT was lobbying for funding. We were trying to get funding. This was back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12, and we are still here.
Okay, because I was just thinking, like, in terms of CEQA, I know that, a lot of people, they say CEQA adds a lot of cost, and if we're saying that it's funding, right, there's currently legislation going through the legislature right now that would exempt new light rail stations from CEQA, so that helps save some of the costs. So I'm wondering if, if that goes through, could that help, get this online? Who knows?
Commissioner Wong, for the record, I formerly worked for regional transit, so I might be able to answer certain questions, but certainly do not want to overstep General Manager Lee as well as the board of SAC-RT's board. But one of the biggest challenges there is really crossing the river. And so the city of Sacramento, that falls within their kind of easement and right-of-way. There has been discussion with Caltrans and the city of Sacramento on how best to approach crossing the river, whether that would be a multimodal use or whether that would be just a transit use or whether that would be, overlaying with vehicles. And so it's very difficult for us to kind of have an answer and to ponder. But I guess I did have one question with staff about if we were to go with option 2, would the projects that are currently in process right now, if I'm hearing Commissioner Tessaishi correctly, they would be in danger of not moving forward until the staff or the process has been completed, and that therefore a report to the Board of Supervisors. I guess I'm trying to understand option 2 and kind of what are the pros and cons.
I think that there's a number of, or maybe not a number, there's a few options that would be available to the board if they do want to pursue that option. We've been mentioning that if the board were concerned about projects being developed in advance of a decision on an amendment, that they may want to consider an urgency ordinance. However, the board wouldn't have to go that route. They could leave all of the current regulations in place and initiate an amendment. Therefore, the projects that are in pipeline would be able to move forward. So there are options that if the board wanted to consider option 2, they could provide direction to staff to handle it in a number of different ways.
Understood.
I'm going to go ahead and make a motion for option number 1.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion before I call for a vote? All right, will you please call the roll?
And members Borja,
I'm gonna say no at this time. For motion 1, right?
apologies if you give me just one moment, please. And Member Rethel?
Yes.
Corona Sabagnano?
No.
Tatishi?
Yes.
And Wong?
No.
And the motion fails.
All right, I'm leaving it open for the next motion.
Chair, I would like to put a motion on option number 2.
Do you have a recommendation on whether it's within an eighth, a quarter, or half a mile, or are you just letting that up to staff?
Part of it, right? You're looking for a specific distance.
Are you looking for a specific distance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's a very nuanced discussion. I think we're gonna take whatever recommendation, or even if there's a non-recommendation or no recommendation coming forward. I mean, our task is going to be to put this together in a narrative for the board to understand what happened here this evening and what the recommendations are, the thoughts and comments were from the Planning Commission. So if you choose to provide a recommendation for option 2 with some specific guidance on areas, I think that's fine. But ultimately, we're going to be seeking direction from the board and providing whatever comments and recommendations come out of this discussion.
Yeah, Bill, the recommendation is inclusive of all of those 8, 1/8, 1/4, 1/2. So the board may consider all of them at once.
Well, if you have a preference on which diameter, radius, distance, you think is reasonable, I think the board might want to know what the Planning Commission was thinking on that issue, because that's been part of the issue you've been discussing.
Yep.
Understood. Would I be in the, Mr. Pahuli, would I be in the right place if I say 1/8 would have, I would imagine, the closest distance to that proposed line and therefore not impact as much of a larger radius?
That's correct. And a lesser number of property owners.
Understood. Chair Rathel, I'm ready to move forward with an amendment to my recommendation, which is number 2, but with just the 1/8 mile radius.
Thank you. And obviously, the land use table and the FAR requirement are 2 separate issues that may not be 1, 2, 3. Is there any desire to look at FAR at this point, or just land use in your motion?
Just the land use table at this time. I would hate to be so restrictive at this point if we don't have all of the pictures kind of in the same place.
Understood. I have a motion on the floor.
A second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, do you please call the roll?
Commissioners Borja,
Yes.
Rathel,
No.
Corona Sabagnano,
Yes.
Datishi,
No.
and Wong,
Yes.
and the motion carries.
All right, we have one more now. The main one is really the change in use from restricting our land use from the 69 acres going up to 300 acres. And then we'll include in that all of the other administrative changes. If anybody has an issue with any of those administrative changes, we can discuss all of those at once now. So everything else left on the table.
The recommendation slide. Okay.
I apologize, Commissioner Savignano. You had mentioned FAR. Would you like to have any further discussion on that before we move forward?
I'm sorry, on what?
Sorry.
On the light rail options?
Yeah.
Yeah, you voted on that.
Yeah, we voted on one motion, but doesn't preclude us from.
Well, I understood the motion to not include any restriction on floor to area ratio, and that was, as I understood it, resolving that.
Got it. That was part of that motion.
You need a motion to reconsider if you want to open that back up, which you could do.
Perfect. I just wanted to check with you before we move forward. I know you had mentioned it in your comments, so I just want to make sure everybody gets their chance. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for clarification, Council. We'll move on now to the whole rest of the recommendation from staff.
So just to clarify, this slide, if hypothetically we were to say we'll move these recommendations, that does not affect anything. They're the two other motions that have successfully moved forward go with this. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's bullets 1 through 3 on this.
1 through 3,
on this
not
slide.
4.
Right. You've
Got it.
already done 4.
Okay. I really don't have any issues with looking at, with approving the top 3 bullets.
That's a motion there?
I'll move staff recommendations for the top 3 bullets.
Second.
Second.
Oh, please.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right.
Recording Wong's motion, or is
Yeah,
it second?
Commissioner Wong.
Thank you.
And will you please call the roll?
Commissioners Borja,
Yes.
Raythel,
Yes.
Corona Sabagnano,
Yes.
Tatishi,
Yes.
and Wong.
Yes.
And the motion carries.
All right, thank you all for your feedback this evening and some tough decisions along the way. I appreciate all the commentary. I appreciate you guys for continuing development out there at the air park. We're looking forward to seeing the changes. And we're going to go ahead and move on. Chris, your planning director's report.
I do not have a update today. I think you did see, in terms of just scheduling matters, we did we did drop the item number 3. That will be on the July 25th meeting agenda. There are a couple of other items for that hearing, so that will happen. And then we have items lined up for the next few Planning Commission hearings as well. So I would expect a busy into the summer. That's all I have.
Thank you. Miscellaneous scheduling items, any of that? I'll let you guys know I will not be here on the 25th. Anyone else have a conflict for the 25th? You're always on it, Commissioner Tishi, and then I have to look at my calendar really quickly.
Are we having multiple items, or is that the only item that night?
There are multiple items. I want to say there's 2 or 3. I think 3 items. Obviously, the appeal hearing is going to be fairly contentious. So I think if there are multiple commissioners missing,
I am
we're gonna need to
technically
talk.
right now. I'm not scheduled to be in Sacramento that evening. I'm curious if I can call in, if that's still available, or has that been suspended again?
No, it is still available. It's an option. I think that the preference from the chair and planning staff is that if you're able to be in person, but it is definitely an option and your choice to.
I have a work function that starts promptly, and which is in that evening, which is why if there's multiple items, I probably can't. I could call in for possibly one item, but I don't think that's fair to any of the potential agenda items if they prefer to have a more full commission that evening.
And it looks like I'm getting feedback from upstairs that the board is considering a resolution to continue remote meetings. So it looks, and as you can see on the screen.
The voice speaks from above.
Yeah, voice speaks from above. And then additionally, I only see 2 items on the 25th agenda. So what is the second? McDonald's staff report and then the Grand Avenue.
Yeah, that's right. There are 2 items.
There are 2. Okay.
It sounds like you still have a quorum. I can't guarantee that I'll be available through the whole meeting.
Yeah, I think what we'll need to do is to talk to the applicant for the appeal hearing to see if they, obviously this item has been continued or dropped for a couple of meetings, and whether or not they want to continue with a 3-person body, which would mean that all 3 members would need to vote in the affirmative in order for it to be approved. So we'll keep you posted.
All right, sounds good. And with any other public comments?
And there are no additional public comments for the remainder of the agenda.
Sounds good. We're going to go ahead and adjourn the Planning Commission at 7:46 this evening. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.